welcome to episode 2 of my mini-series Brews101. In this episode, I'm going to hop into the world of whiskey and all the variations. We'll find out what makes a scotch, bourbon, and Tennessee whiskey, Tennessee whiskey. So first up is bourbon, and you might be asking, well, what makes a bourbon a bourbon? Well, first off, legally, it must consist of 51% corn, be aged in virgin barrels at least 2 years, and it's got to hover between 80 and 101 proof. If you're not familiar with what the proofs are, proof is pretty much just twice what the alcohol percentage is. So if something's 100 proof, then it's 50% alcohol. So your most genuine bourbon is going to be coming from the good old bluegrass state, Kentucky. However, micro distillers all over the country are starting to make what they call bourbon, and it's typically sold in barrels shipped from Kentucky, but this is just to trick you. So you got to be careful. Some good examples of bourbon are Buffalo Trace, Maker's Mark, and Wild Turkey. These bourbons are going to taste real oaky from the barrel, and they're going to have some notes of vanilla. If you want to make a cocktail out of bourbon, that's kind of blasphemy, according to some people, so I wouldn't even try. But you can get it in a Manhattan, or you can make an old-fashioned. It's up to you. So on to Tennessee whiskey, and what makes Tennessee whiskey different than bourbon? There's really not a whole lot of difference. The only difference is Tennessee whiskey gets filtered through charcoal, which kind of makes it a little more sweeter, a little less bitter, a little bit more mellow. And obviously you can have a Jack and Coke. I mean, it's not just a clever name. It makes a good drink. A whiskey sour, or even just plain on the rocks is fine. So now on to rye whiskey. And now you're asking, well, what makes rye whiskey rye whiskey? Well, I think you guessed it, rye. Now rye whiskey is going to come from Kentucky again. It's pretty similar to bourbon, in that over half of the mash has to be of rye. It's got to be composed of rye. So it's going to make it a little drier. It's going to be a little less sweet than bourbon. It kind of sticks in your throat a little more. Just an overall more of a slap in your face type of flavor. So now we'll move on to the huge and crazy world of Scotch. And Scotch down the road is going to get its own little mini episode just due to the complexity, and the people can get a little confused about what Scotch actually is, where it comes from, and how it's made, and why they call it a Scotch. Scotch is a malt whiskey, although it can be a grain. That's really all about the aging process. It's got to sit in a barrel for at least 3 years, and the longer it sits there, the more flavor, the tastier it is. Scotch is either going to come as a blend or a single malt. And how they make a blend is they just take whiskeys from the same distillery and just mix them all together. Some of your more popular Scotches are going to be your Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, and good old-fashioned Johnny Walker. A lot of that old smoky flavor that a lot of people love is actually from the peat. And a lot of the wood and floral notes are just from aging in the barrel. And now on to the super smoothness of Irish whiskey. And the reason it's so smooth is they don't use peat in their distillation process, and it's actually triple distilled in most places and sits 3 years in a cask. It comes from the Emerald Isle. Some more popular Irish whiskeys are going to be your Jameson, your Bushmills, your Redbreast. If you're looking for a real smooth whiskey, definitely give these a shot. And that's going to wrap it up for the whiskey episode. I know I'm missing some of them